A quiet community in Tennessee was left in shock when a case that began in 2011 finally came to a devastating conclusion. The findings and the arrests that followed reopened wounds many thought would never heal. On the morning of April 13, 2011, 20-year-old nursing student Holly Bobo was last seen outside her family's home as she prepared to leave for class. Her brother spotted Holly walking toward the edge of the property with a man dressed in camouflage. At first, he assumed it was her boyfriend. A neighbor heard a chilling scream echo through the woods, but within hours, it became clear Holly had vanished. For years, her disappearance remained an untraceable mystery. Search parties scoured the woods, helicopters swept the skies, and national media carried her photo, but there were no solid leads. Holly's case became one of Tennessee's most haunting true crime stories, a reminder of how a loved one could vanish in the light of day, just steps away from home. The cold case stretched on for more than 3 years. Families mourned in silence, neighbors whispered in fear, and investigators chased every possible lead. Then, in 2014, authorities announced a shocking breakthrough. A man, along with his friend and brother, had been indicted in connection with Holly's kidnapping and murder. It wasn't until 2017, however, that he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Who was this murderer? How did he manage to stay hidden in plain sight? Could he be her boyfriend? Subscribe to this channel for more real-life cold cases that have been solved. Every view, like, and comment keeps these victims' names alive and ensures their stories are not forgotten. Drop your city or country and time you're watching in the comments, and I will create a video on a cold case from your area, because every community has stories that deserve to be told. Holly Lynn Bobo was the embodiment of small-town ambition and goodness. Born on October 12, 1990, she was 20 years old at the time of her disappearance, and her future was already laid out with purpose. She was not a celebrity or a troubled soul. She was a student on a determined path to a selfless career. Holly was enrolled at the Tennessee Technology Center in nearby Jackson, working diligently toward becoming a licensed practical nurse. Her passion for caring for others was genuine, fueled by an innate kindness that friends and family described as central to her character. She woke up at 4:30 a.m. the day she vanished, not for a party but to study for an exam. Her dedication was ironclad. Holly was, quite simply, an incredibly good kid. She was polite, responsible, and hardworking. She drove a silver Ford Explorer, attended church, and spent her time focused on school and family. Her style was sweet and feminine. She was known for wearing a lot of pink, a color that quickly became the symbol of the massive search effort that followed her disappearance, with pink ribbons tied to every tree and signpost across West Tennessee. She carried a pink purse and wore a pink shirt the morning she was taken. Holly's life revolved around her family and their home on Swan Johnson Road in Darden, Tennessee, a town that doesn't even register 400 people on the map. It was the quintessential rural, close-knit American family environment. Holly's mother, Karen, was the bedrock of the family, a registered nurse herself, who instilled in Holly a strong work ethic and the desire to care for others. The two shared a deep bond. Karen's life was built around her children, and she trusted the safety of their quiet corner of the world. Holly's father, Dana, was a devoted father who worked hard to provide for his family. In the days and years following her disappearance, his public image became one of quiet strength and agonizing perseverance as he tirelessly spearheaded search efforts. Holly's younger brother, Clint, was 17 years old at the time and the last person to see his sister. His testimony, seeing a man in camouflage leading Holly into the woods, was a core, yet emotionally traumatic part of the early investigation. The events of that morning, waking up to a commotion and seeing his sister in distress, irrevocably changed his young life. Their family structure was one of routine and normalcy, which made the sudden violent intrusion of a predator so profoundly destabilizing. Karen and Dana had already left for work that Wednesday morning, believing Holly and Clint were safe and sound in their home. It was the natural, everyday trust of their community that was shattered when a neighbor's call informed Karen that a horrific scene had unfolded at her own house. Darden is located in Decatur County, a sparsely populated area where everyone knows everyone. This wasn't a place accustomed to violent crime, especially one involving a daylight kidnapping. Holly's disappearance didn't just affect her immediate family. It traumatized the entire community of West Tennessee. Their lifestyle was one of inherent trust and interconnectedness. Neighbors were family, and the woods surrounding their homes were places for hunting, not hiding secrets. When Holly vanished, the community didn't wait for the authorities to act. They mobilized instantly. Thousands of residents, from seasoned hunters to elderly churchgoers, transformed into search teams. They scoured the thick forests, fields, and riverbeds. This collective action was a testament to the kind of girl Holly was, a person who was genuinely loved, a beacon of light that everyone felt compelled to bring home. The sight of a smiling, dark-haired nursing student on posters plastered everywhere became a constant, painful reminder of the nightmare that had swallowed their quiet, peaceful lives. The crime stripped the community of its greatest asset, the feeling of safety. The Bobo family, their simple life, and their trusting community were all at ground zero when a single, terrifying scream announced the arrival of unimaginable darkness. Holly Bobo was not a mere statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a nurse-to-be whose loss created a void that years of searching and prosecution could never truly fill. The Bobo family's routine on Wednesday, April 13, 2011, was one of predictable, early morning order, typical of a hardworking family in rural Tennessee. What started as an ordinary weekday, driven by school schedules and work shifts, quickly devolved into a scene of unspeakable terror that would shatter their lives and seize the attention of a nation. Holly, a conscientious student preparing for a career in nursing, was the first to rise. Her day began at 4:30 a.m., not out of necessity, but out of dedication. She had an exam looming, and the hours before dawn were her dedicated study time. She would have had the house mostly to herself, a quiet, safe space where she could focus on her books and notes before the bustle of the day began. By 7:30 a.m., the morning gears had shifted. Holly's parents, Karen and Dana Bobo, had already left for their respective jobs. Karen, a registered nurse, and Dana, a working father, had entrusted the home to their two children, a scenario played out in countless American households every day. Holly's younger brother, Clint Bobo, was still asleep in his room. The house, nestled in the remote comfort of Swan Johnson Road in Darden, seemed perfectly secure. The first documented outside contact that morning, just minutes after her parents departed, was a phone call that tied Holly to the periphery of the outside world. At approximately 7:30 a.m., Holly answered a call from her boyfriend, Drew Scott, who was turkey hunting not far away on his grandmother's property. This was an unremarkable, everyday conversation, the kind of check-in that cements a regular timeline. It confirmed Holly was home, alive, and engaged in her typical morning activities. The last piece of direct documented activity by Holly herself occurred just 12 minutes later. At 7:42 a.m., she completed what would be her final outgoing phone call. From that moment forward, Holly's phone remained active and traceable via cell phone pings, but every subsequent attempt to contact her, every incoming call and text, went unanswered. The communication had ceased, not with a planned sign-off, but with the sudden, jarring silence of an interrupted life. It was during this critical, small window of time, immediately following her last call, that the first signs of trouble began to register in the quiet neighborhood. A nearby neighbor heard what they described as a scream emanating from the Bobo residence. It was a sound that, in a place like Darden, would register immediately as profoundly wrong. This neighbor, alerted by the sudden piercing noise, called their mother to relay the disturbing sound. That neighbor's mother, in turn, called Holly's mother, Karen, at work. Karen's instinct, upon hearing the fragmented account of a scream, was to contact her home immediately. She called Holly's cell phone, receiving no answer. She then tried the house line, a frantic attempt to connect with her children. Inside the Bobo home, the tranquility had been obliterated by the presence of an intruder. The family dogs, roused by the unfamiliar disturbance, began barking furiously. This sudden, violent alarm is what woke the 17-year-old Clint Bobo. Disoriented but compelled by the noise, Clint looked out and into the garage area of the home. What he saw would become the central, devastating detail of the initial police investigation, and a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Clint testified that he saw Holly outside with a man. He initially thought the man might be her boyfriend, Drew Scott, but the reality was far more sinister. The man was dressed head to toe in camouflage clothing and wearing a hat, obscuring any distinct features. The camouflage was so complete that Clint could only identify the pattern as either mossy oak breakup or leafy wear. Clint described the scene. It appeared to be Holly kneeling down, and they looked like they were kneeled down, facing each other in the garage, and they were talking back and forth. But the interaction was clearly not consensual. Holly sounded very upset and heated, and the man's voice was described as very deep and low, doing most of the talking. The visual of Holly kneeling was a terrifying sign of duress. The scene then became an abduction. Clint watched as the man forcibly led Holly away from the garage and into the thick woods that backed up to their rural property. The camouflage man had her by the arm, walking her into the trees, away from the safety of her home and towards an unknown fate. It was the sight of this forced march that propelled Clint into action. He tried calling Holly's cell phone and Drew Scott's cell phone, but neither call was answered. When his mother, Karen, called back, Clint relayed the terrifying, unbelievable sequence of events. Karen, reacting on pure maternal instinct and panic, immediately instructed her son to call 911. While Clint waited for the police, his panic spurred him to grab a loaded pistol and venture outside. He wasn't gone for long, but what he found was the irrefutable evidence that confirmed his worst fears. Bloodstains belonging to Holly in the garage. The kidnapping was real, violent, and minutes old. The moment the 911 call was placed, the resources of local and state law enforcement were thrown at the case. But the critical minutes following the abduction were a frustrating period of confusion and lost time. Holly was gone, swallowed by the dense rural landscape. The ensuing search effort was immediate and overwhelming, quickly becoming known as the most exhaustive and expensive investigation ever conducted by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI. The initial focus was the immediate area around the Bobo home and the woods where Clint last saw them disappear. The community of Darden and surrounding counties mobilized instantly. Thousands of volunteers descended upon the area, forming massive search grids that scoured every field, thicket, barn, and creek. They searched on foot, on horseback, and with ATVs, driven by the personal connection they all felt to the missing nursing student. The landscape, however, was vast, rugged, and unforgiving, making a swift discovery nearly impossible. Investigators immediately utilized technology to trace Holly's steps. They analyzed cell phone pings, which showed her phone moving away from her home cell tower, heading north. This digital trail led to a wooded area near Interstate 40. The phone signal stopped for a period before a later secondary ping showed it moving again, heading south on a different route. This confirmed the abductor's movement and provided investigators with a geographical focus, but not a victim. Over the days and weeks that followed, a heartbreaking trail of Holly's personal items were found scattered across the town, providing grim confirmation that she had been kidnapped and was being moved, while simultaneously offering frustratingly few direct clues to her location or her abductor's identity. Lunchbox and school card. These were among the first items found, personal effects meant for a normal day that had been abandoned. Receipt with her name, a seemingly mundane piece of paper that confirmed her identity and movements before the abduction. Cell phone and SIM card. The discovery of her actual phone and, separately, the SIM card removed from the phone was particularly chilling. This indicated that the person holding Holly was attempting to eliminate her digital footprint and evade tracing, a calculated and sinister move. Each discovery only magnified the community's agony. The items were close enough to be painful, reminders of her normal life, but offered no clear path to her rescue. The investigation settled into a long, grueling hunt for a missing girl who had seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a brother's terrifying memory, a few bloodstains, and a trail of discarded pink possessions in the Tennessee woods. The day the scream broke the silence, Darden lost its innocence, and the life of Holly Bobo became a tragic, unfolding mystery. The initial hours after the 911 call from Clint Bobo launched what would become an immediate and massive law enforcement response. However, the Holly Bobo investigation quickly transformed into a complex and sprawling case marked by false leads, conflicting statements, and an unnerving absence of traditional forensic evidence. The challenge was immense. Finding a 20-year-old girl who had been violently snatched from a remote location by a predator who immediately vanished into an ocean of woods. In the critical first days and weeks, investigators from the local sheriff's department and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, were working with very little. Their initial theories focused on a combination of possibilities, all pointing toward an opportunistic or calculated abduction by a stranger. The sight of Holly being led away by a camouflaged man suggested a perpetrator who may have been scouting the rural area, possibly someone involved in illegal activities like methamphetamine production, who stumbled upon the opportunity. Given the violence and the immediate disappearance, the TBI heavily pursued leads related to registered sex offenders in the area. This theory, supported by a belief held by an early TBI lead detective, posited that a known sexual predator was responsible, which unfortunately diverted significant resources away from other local possibilities in the early stages. While the Bobo family held on to hope for a rescue, the quick discovery of bloodstains and Holly's discarded digitally disabled cell phone suggested a professional or highly motivated individual who intended to eliminate communication and cover their tracks immediately, pointing toward the dire possibility of a rapid homicide. The early search was conducted under the presumption that Holly might still be alive and being held captive somewhere nearby. This fueled the initial, desperate, and ultimately fruitless ground efforts across thousands of acres. As the investigation stretched from days into months and years, the case became a notorious puzzle with a rotating cast of potential suspects. Law enforcement was inundated with tips and rumors, a common challenge in high-profile missing persons cases in the small towns. Holly's boyfriend, Drew Scott, who spoke to her just minutes before the abduction, was quickly cleared. His alibi and cooperation placed him miles away, hunting, effectively eliminating him from the suspect pool. Clint Bobo's description of the man in camouflage was detailed yet ultimately too generic. The rural Tennessee setting meant camouflage clothing was commonplace, making the visual evidence nearly useless for an initial identification. It was a full 3 years after Holly's disappearance, in March 2014, before the investigative focus truly narrowed onto the men who would eventually be charged. The key break came not from forensics, but from a series of incriminating statements and a confession from one of the group. John Dylan Adams. Arrested on unrelated weapons charges, Dylan Adams, the brother of Zach Adams, gave a shocking statement to police. He claimed he had seen Holly Bobo alive at his brother's home after the abduction, sitting in a chair with his brother, Zachary Adams, and friend, Jason Autry, present. This statement, despite being later recanted by Dylan and having details inconsistent with the final narrative, led to the crucial arrests of the 3 men for especially aggravated kidnapping, first-degree murder, and rape. Shane Austin. Another man, Shane Kyle Austin, was also implicated through this circle and was offered immunity in exchange for information. Phone records indicated he was in contact with Zach Adams on the day of the abduction, suggesting his involvement in the disposal of the body. Austin would later commit suicide, adding a darker layer to the case and terminating a potential source of information. The process was slow, relying heavily on testimony from individuals connected to a dark world of drug use and petty crime, a fact that complicated the reliability of their statements but ultimately cracked the case. The prosecution in the Holly Bobo case ultimately relied on a tapestry of different types of evidence, as a decisive piece of DNA evidence connecting the primary suspect, Zach Adams, to Holly was never found. The blood evidence found in the Bobo garage confirmed the violent nature of the abduction and the presence of Holly's DNA at the scene. The discovery of Holly's partial remains in September 2014 was a gruesome breakthrough. Forensic analysis of the skull and bones confirmed the identity and, crucially, established the cause of death as a gunshot wound to the back of the head, officially upgrading the case from kidnapping to murder. However, the state of the remains after 3 years limited the discovery of other DNA or forensic material. The cell phone pings from Holly's phone provided the investigation with its most concrete, objective timeline of the abductor's movement away from the Bobo residence and toward the general area where her remains were eventually found. This data corroborated the geographical context of the crime, providing a time-stamped, non-human account of the direction of travel immediately following the abduction. In the absence of physical evidence, the testimony of accomplices and acquaintances became the backbone of the prosecution. The most critical testimony came from Jason Autry, who eventually agreed to a plea bargain to testify against Zach Adams. Autry's detailed and graphic account provided the missing narrative. He claimed he helped Adams move what they thought was Bobo's body wrapped in a blanket. When she moved, indicating she was still alive, he testified that he served as a lookout while Adams shot her under a bridge near a river. This testimony, praised as highly credible by the trial judge, painted the picture of the final act of the murder and was pivotal in securing a conviction. Other witnesses, including jail inmates, testified that Zach Adams made incriminating admissions about his involvement in Bobo's death while they were incarcerated together, bolstering the prosecution's argument of his guilt. The investigation into the murder of Holly Bobo was a marathon of persistence, where the lack of traditional forensic evidence was ultimately overcome by the digital breadcrumbs of the cell phone and the controversial yet compelling testimony of the people in the perpetrator's own circle. The convictions brought a measure of justice, but the complexity and the subsequent recantation of the star witness would ensure that the full truth of Holly Bobo's murder remains a source of lingering public debate. For 41 long, harrowing months, the disappearance of Holly Bobo had been an open wound in the heart of West Tennessee. The collective breath of her family and community had been held since that terrifying April morning in 2011, sustained only by the slender, diminishing thread of hope. The massive, unprecedented search effort had yielded fragments, a bloodstain, a discarded phone, a handful of leads, but never the final conclusive proof of what happened to the girl in the pink shirt. That desperate uncertainty ended abruptly in the late summer of September 2014, when the most significant and most devastating discovery of the entire investigation was made. The discovery confirmed the community's deepest fears, transforming the case forever from a high-profile missing person case into a confirmed brutal murder. The breakthrough did not come from a massive police operation or a dramatic confession, but from a chance encounter by two unassuming men in a dense, remote patch of woods. Holly Bobo's partial remains were discovered by ginseng hunters, individuals foraging for the valuable root in the forest, in an area far enough from her home to suggest a calculated attempt to conceal the crime, yet close enough to the suspects to become a crucial piece of the prosecution's geographical puzzle. The location was in northern Decatur County, Tennessee, specifically on private forested property just off Interstate 40. This area was geographically significant. It was almost 20 miles away from the Bobo family home in Darden, yet it was situated only about 6 miles from the home of Zach Adams, the man who would eventually be convicted of her murder. One of the men who made the grim discovery, Larry Stone, recounted the moment of chilling realization. As they traversed the thick undergrowth, they came across a large, rusted metal bucket, an odd piece of refuse in an otherwise natural environment. Out of idle curiosity or perhaps an ingrained habit of searching, Stone decided to flip the bucket over. Beneath it lay the unmistakable, macabre sign of the terrible secret the woods had been keeping: a human skull. A frantic, sick feeling of dread would have instantly overtaken the men. They were certain they had found the end of the Holly Bobo case. A subsequent agonizing sweep of the immediate area revealed more skeletal fragments: her teeth, several ribs, and one shoulder blade scattered on the ground nearby. The hunters immediately contacted authorities. When investigators arrived, the scene became the central focus of the TBI's efforts. Due to the amount of time the remains had been exposed to the elements, they were incomplete and heavily weathered. The recovery process was meticulous and painstaking, involving forensic anthropologists and dozens of investigators carefully sifting through the earth and foliage, desperate to gather every available piece of evidence. The hope of finding any recoverable DNA was slim, but the remains themselves provided confirmation of identity and, more importantly, the nature of her death. The discovery of the remains answered the where and the what. The body of Holly Bobo had finally been found. But the subsequent forensic examination was required to answer the definitive how. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for official examination. Using dental records, which had been collected years prior, forensic experts confirmed beyond a doubt that the skull and bones belonged to Holly Lynn Bobo. The long, agonizing period of being a missing person was over. She was now officially the victim of a homicide. The most critical and devastating finding for the prosecution and the Bobo family concerned the final violent act of the crime. The forensic analysis of the skull revealed a conclusive truth. Holly Bobo died from a gunshot wound to the back of the head. This finding was crucial for several reasons. Confirmation of murder. It eliminated any possibility of a non-criminal death, definitively classifying the case as a murder. Narrative corroboration. It strongly supported the forthcoming testimony of prosecution star witness Jason Autry. Autry, as a part of his plea deal, would later detail the shocking final moments, claiming he watched as Zach Adams shot Holly under a bridge. The cause of death, a gunshot wound, aligned perfectly with the chilling story Autry told the jury. Elevation of charges. The cause of death, a violent, premeditated act, provided the necessary evidence for the state of Tennessee to pursue the most serious charges of first-degree murder against the suspects already in custody. The gruesome confirmation of a gunshot wound to the head cemented the crime as a brutal, execution-style slaying, crushing the community's last desperate hope that Holly might have been lost or accidentally killed. It painted the abductor not as an opportunist, but as a cold-blooded killer determined to eliminate his victim and cover his tracks. The discovery of Holly's body, after years of silence and speculation, brought a profound, painful sense of closure. It allowed the Bobo family to finally move forward from the search phase to the pursuit of justice, setting the stage for one of the most emotional and high-stakes murder trials in Tennessee history. The woods near Interstate 40, once just a remote patch of wilderness, had become hallowed, tragic ground, the final, quiet resting place of the girl in the pink shirt. The investigation into Holly Bobo's disappearance and murder was a grueling, 3-year process before the first arrests were made. While police had gathered numerous tips and interviewed dozens of people, the decisive shift toward prosecution only occurred after certain individuals within the local drug culture began to break their silence. The arrests and subsequent charges would bring a core group of men into the courtroom spotlight, even as lingering questions about others implicated remained. The first significant breakthrough in the case, leading to the arrests of the men eventually charged, came in March 2014, well before Holly's remains were discovered. This critical development was sparked by a statement that directed the investigation away from random strangers and toward a localized, interconnected group of acquaintances. The initial arrest that catalyzed the case was that of John Dylan Adams, the brother of Zachary Adams. Dylan was initially detained on unrelated weapons charges, but during questioning, he made the shocking statement that would implicate his brother and his friend in Holly's abduction. He claimed that he had seen Holly Bobo alive at his brother Zach's home, with Zach and Jason Autry present after she had been kidnapped. Though Dylan later recanted this confession, claiming it was coerced, it provided law enforcement with the necessary probable cause to pursue the core suspects. Following Dylan's statement, the focus rapidly centered on his brother and friend, Zachary "Zach" Adams. Arrested in March 2014, he was identified as the primary perpetrator. Jason Autry, arrested shortly after Zach Adams, he was identified as the accomplice. John Dylan Adams. He was formally charged based on his own statements and subsequent investigative leads. These 3 men, Adams, his brother, and his friend, were the primary defendants in the murder of Holly Bobo. The charges leveled against the 3 men were severe, reflecting the violent nature of the crimes described by the witness statements and confirmed by the later discovery of the body. Zachary Adams faced and was convicted of the most serious charges. The prosecution successfully argued that he was the principal actor in the kidnapping, sexual assault, and ultimate murder of Holly Bobo. His conviction and life sentence were the culmination of the highly publicized 2017 trial. John Dylan Adams accepted an offered plea, which allows a defendant to plead guilty while maintaining their innocence, acknowledging that the prosecution has enough evidence to likely secure a conviction. His conviction was for facilitating the crimes based on his presence and knowledge of Holly after the abduction. Jason Autry secured a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against Zach Adams. Autry's role as the star witness, providing the chilling narrative of Holly's final moments and the disposal of her body, was considered invaluable to the prosecution. His plea to lesser charges resulted in a significantly reduced sentence, allowing him to be released from custody shortly after the trial. The TBI investigation was vast, with at least 6 men initially implicated in some capacity through witness statements, drug connections, or phone records. However, not all were brought to trial. Shane Kyle Austin. Austin was heavily implicated early in the investigation. Phone records showed he was in contact with Zach Adams on the day of the abduction, leading investigators to believe he was involved in either the rape or the disposal of the body. He was initially offered immunity in exchange for information regarding the location of Holly's body. However, Austin committed suicide in a Florida hotel room in February 2015 before he could be questioned further or formally prosecuted, effectively ending his involvement in the legal case. Jeffrey and Mark Piercy. These two men were also arrested on charges of accessory after the fact and tampering with evidence, based on the complex web of associations and alleged attempts to destroy or conceal evidence related to the core suspects. After further investigation and legal review, the charges against the Piercy brothers were eventually dropped. The arrests and subsequent court proceedings ultimately narrowed the focus to the three primary defendants. The legal drama, driven by the intense witness testimony and the absence of direct forensic links to the main killer, dominated the courtroom proceedings and brought the initial phase of justice for Holly Bobo's family. The arrests of Zach and Dylan Adams and Jason Autry initiated the legal phase of the Holly Bobo case, a process that culminated in one of the most emotional and closely watched trials in Tennessee history. The prosecution, facing a lack of definitive physical evidence connecting Zach Adams directly to Holly, was forced to rely on a strategic combination of circumstantial facts, cell phone data, and the dramatic, detailed testimony of an accomplice. The trial for Zachary Adams was moved from Decatur County to Hardin County due to the intense media coverage and local sentiment, requiring a sequestered jury. The prosecution's strategy centered on weaving together multiple strands of evidence to paint a cohesive picture of Adams as the predator who orchestrated Holly's kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The key pieces of evidence presented by the prosecution included the disappearance and recovery, the testimony of Clint Bobo describing the abduction of Holly by a man in camouflage established the crime. The recovery of Holly's remains in September 2014 and the forensic confirmation of her death by gunshot to the back of the head established the act of murder and the time frame. The digital timeline. Analysis of cell phone pings from Holly's phone provided an objective, non-human witness to the perpetrator's movements immediately after the abduction, showing the phone moving away from the Bobo home toward the area where her body was later discovered. This digital footprint corroborated the movements described in the eventual witness testimony. Incriminating admissions. Testimony from friends, associates, and jailhouse inmates was vital. These witnesses recounted incriminating statements made by Zach Adams about his involvement in the case, including boasts about his actions or questions about divine forgiveness for the Holly killing. This evidence was used to demonstrate Adams' guilt and consciousness of guilt. The corpus delicti. The prosecution used the physical evidence, the blood in the garage, the location of the body, and the manner of death, to build a foundation for the narrative that only an insider could fully detail. The most decisive element of the prosecution's case was the testimony of accomplice Jason Autry. Autry was facing charges of first-degree murder, especially aggravated kidnapping and rape, but he secured a plea deal. He would plead guilty to lesser charges of solicitation to commit murder and facilitation of especially aggravated kidnapping in exchange for his full, honest testimony against Zach Adams. Autry's time on the stand was dramatic and graphic. He provided the jury with the full, chilling account of the murder that had been missing from the official record. Autry testified that he helped Zach Adams transport what he believed was Holly's body, wrapped in a blanket, to a wooded area near the Tennessee River. He claimed that as they prepared to dump the body, Holly moved and made a sound, indicating she was still alive. Autry told the jury that Adams became enraged, retrieved a gun, and, with Autry acting as a lookout, shot Holly under a bridge. He described hearing the fatal shot echo in the silence. Autry's testimony was delivered in a calm, detailed, and deliberate manner, which the trial judge found highly credible. This narrative effectively filled the holes in the physical evidence, providing the jury with a clear, step-by-step account of the kidnapping, rape, and murder. His testimony was the critical weight that tipped the scales of justice against Adams. On September 22, 2017, after 10 days of emotional, intense, and highly publicized testimony, the jury returned its verdict. They found Zachary Adams guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, especially aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated rape. The following day, the jury reconvened for the sentencing phase. After hearing arguments, they voted against the death penalty. Instead, Zach Adams was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder, plus an additional 50 years for the kidnapping and rape charges to be served consecutively. Adams maintained his innocence following the verdict. While Zach Adams was tried and convicted, his brother John Dylan Adams avoided a trial. In January 2018, Dylan Adams accepted an offered plea deal. Under the terms of the deal, Dylan pleaded guilty to facilitation of first-degree murder and especially aggravated kidnapping. By accepting the offered plea, he did not have to personally admit guilt, but acknowledged that the prosecution had enough evidence, including his own initial recanted statement, to likely secure a conviction against him. Dylan Adams was sentenced to 35 years in prison. His plea deal, like Autry's testimony, ensured that the state could secure convictions against the main participants and avoid the complexities of a second major trial, bringing a swifter, though legally less conclusive, resolution to his portion of the case. Even with the convictions of Zach Adams and Dylan Adams, the Holly Bobo murder case failed to settle into judicial finality. The integrity of the key trial evidence, the testimony of Jason Autry, became the central focus of a prolonged legal battle, resulting in continuous appeals and motions for a new trial years after the original verdict. The first major crack in the case's resolution emerged from the witness who had been most critical to securing Zach Adams' conviction, Jason Autry. Following his cooperation with the prosecution, Autry was released from custody in September 2020 after serving his reduced sentence of 8 years. However, he was arrested again shortly thereafter on unrelated federal weapons charges. Years after the trial, court documents revealed that Jason Autry had recanted his entire testimony against Zach Adams. Autry asserted that he had fabricated the details of his testimony, including the horrifying scene of the shooting, to secure the plea deal and avoid spending the rest of his life in prison. According to the claims, Autry admitted that before the 2017 trial, he was given access to the discovery material. He claimed he used this material, including extensive cell phone data, to recreate his day and add Holly to it, making his false story perfectly align with the existing facts and digital evidence presented by the state. This recantation, coming from the single witness who provided the crucial narrative of the murder, immediately became the primary basis for Zach Adams's ongoing appeals. Armed with Autry's recantation, Zachary Adams and his new legal team launched aggressive efforts to overturn his conviction. His lawyers filed a coram nobis petition and motions for a new trial. The core argument of Adams' appeals was that Autry's recantation constituted new evidence of prosecutorial misconduct or a fundamental miscarriage of justice that, had it been available during the 2017 trial, would have resulted in an acquittal. They argued that without Autry's testimony, the prosecution's case lacked the necessary direct link and motive to prove Adams' guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, especially given the lack of Adams' DNA at the scene. The post-conviction legal battle returned the case to the Tennessee courtroom years after the original trial. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Nichols, vehemently opposed Adams's motions. Prosecutors argued that recanted testimony is viewed with extreme suspicion. They maintained that Adams would have been convicted even without Autry's testimony, citing the numerous other trial witnesses who confirmed Adams made incriminating admissions about the murder. They stressed that Adams failed to provide new, specific evidence beyond Autry's unsworn blanket statements. Through legal proceedings occurring primarily in 2024 and 2025, the various motions and petitions filed by Zach Adams for a new trial have generally faced significant legal hurdles. Judges have largely sided with the prosecution, ruling that Autry's recantation did not meet the high legal threshold required to grant a new trial or overturn the original jury verdict. The courts have often noted that the original conviction was supported by a wider range of circumstantial and testimonial evidence beyond just Autry's account, and that the prosecution had thoroughly litigated the case. As of the latest updates, Zachary Adams remains convicted and is serving his life sentence. While his legal team continues to pursue avenues for appeal and post-conviction relief based on the recanted testimony, the Tennessee courts have thus far upheld the jury's 2017 guilty verdict, ensuring that the legal battle over the final truth in Holly Bobo's murder remains active but unsuccessful for the defense. True crime is not just about the horror of what happened, but the lessons we take away. If you believe Holly Bobo name should never be forgotten, hit the like button and share this video so more people hear her story.